I wake before the alarms. Not because I want to, because something presses against the walls when it's quiet, waiting for me to move. The orchard sits beyond the window, a dark lung of limbs clawed against the sky. Bare trunks arch like ribs. Some mornings it looks dead, stripped and empty. Some mornings it breathes, branches rising and falling slow, like lungs drawing shallow air through bone. Last week I told myself it was wind, sliding between trunks, rattling twigs. But wind doesn't stare back. It doesn't lean forward when you aren't looking. I check the phone before I even swing my legs over the bed. The alert banner flickers once, unknown entity sighted. Remain inside. It disappears before I can tap it. I press the screen anyway. Dead pixels bloom like dark eyes that won't blink. I sit with it, thumb hovering, afraid to wake it. A whisper from the trees, or from inside my head. I lean toward the window. Shapes smear in the fog that crawls low between trunks. Not mist. Too slow, deliberate. Breath curling from soil. I swallow. My tongue sticks to my teeth like cardboard left in rain. I try to spit, but nothing comes. The air tastes metallic, like licking coins ground into dust. Stay inside. My neighbor rasped last night when I asked about his missing dog. His eyes darted toward the orchard. He wouldn't meet mine. Don't look too long. I nodded. Didn't ask why. Asking feels like opening a door that leads nowhere but dark. The radio hisses alive, only static. A high drill screams in my ears, slicing through bone. I shut it. Silence folds back in like wet cloth over a face. I step onto the porch. Cold climbs up through the floorboards, sharp as needles, soaking through socks until my toes feel scraped raw. The railing trembles beneath my fingers, not loose, not broken, but alive. I grip it hard enough to leave pale marks. The orchard stares. No movement, but the quiet hums against my ears, thick and suffocating. Even the birds are gone. The stillness presses in like padded walls closing around me. I press my knuckles to the wood until they hurt. Stay inside, I whisper, unsure if I'm warning myself or the trees. A flicker at the orchard's edge, a smear of pale between trunks. Gone before I can blink. My breath locks. Shallow, stupid, like sipping air through a cracked straw. I blink. Nothing. My stomach knots tight enough to snap. I stagger back inside, nearly tripping over the threshold. I catch myself against the wall, fingers digging into plaster like they're holding me upright. I press my ear to the glass. No sound. Only silence stretched too long, waiting for me to slip up. I open the emergency log on the phone. The screen freezes, numbers warped, static crawling over the display like insects. I slam it down. It jiggles like it's laughing at me. The silence grows heavier. I step out again, drawing in short gasps until air scrapes rough as sandpaper, never enough. The orchard scent rolls up in waves. Wet leaves rotted into slime, bark peeling like skin, something sour and sweet that makes my teeth ache. I try to name it. Nothing fits. My mind loops uselessly until it stops. The orchard stink crawls under my skin like ants mapping every inch. I back inside. I pace barefoot on cold tiles. Silence clings to the corners, sticky with damp like a throat swallowing me down. The clock ticks, too loud, each beat hammering against my skull. I press fingers to my temples until it dulls. The throbbing spreads. I check the windows. Curtains drawn tight. I pull them back an inch. Darkness swells like wet velvet, sealed against the glass. I stare until it stops moving. It waits patient. I shut it. The room feels hollow, stripped bare, as if I'm the intruder. I boil water. It rattles under the lid like something breathing from inside the pot. I turn the flame down, but the bubbles keep forming, small and sharp, stabbing pins through the skin of the metal. I stare. The sound doesn't stop. I scoop tea leaves into the mug. They smell wrong, bitter, metallic, like pennies ground fine and stirred into hot water. I throw them out. I sit by the window until dawn softens the edges of the orchard's blackness. The trunks blur but still lean forward, hunched and waiting. I press my forehead to the glass. It's damp. Not from outside, from within. Sweat slicks the base of my neck and slides down like melted ice cubes along my spine. I whisper the warning softer this time, because saying it loud feels like inviting it closer. Stay inside. The words vibrate against my teeth until grit crumbles off enamel. I swallow. My lips tremble like live wires sparking. A crack opens in my chest. Breath catches halfway, ugly like glass splintering inside me. The morning alert finally loads. The screen flickers, then dies. I press it again until it wakes. A new message scrolls once, vanishing before I can catch it. Unidentified entity, remain indoors. Contact will be established. Do not approach. Gone. I stare at the blank screen until numbers blur. The orchard's edge seems to lean forward, shoulders hunched, ready to crawl toward me. I write this now before it changes. I don't know what it wants. I don't know if it's real. I only know the silence stretches too long, the dark waits too patiently, and every breath tastes wrong. I keep telling myself to stay inside, but sometimes I wonder if staying in is exactly what it wants. The orchard waits too long before it moves. I tell myself it's nothing, just fog curling low. But the second time I step onto the porch, the air drags against my lungs like wet cloth stuffed deep inside, choking every breath. The branches don't sway. They sag. I step off the porch. The ground feels soft, treacherous in patches, hollow in others, as if roots coil beneath, eager for the weight of a footfall. Stay inside, I whisper. The words catch halfway, sticking like grit on the roof of my mouth. A sharp crack from the orchard's edge jerks my eyes toward it. Something flutters between two trunks. Pale. Fast. Wrong. For one breath it's there, shoulders hunched, limbs bent at strange angles, and then gone. My legs tremble hard enough to fold. I grab the railing already behind me. My knuckles turn white. The silence holds its breath. It doesn't shift. I sweep the flashlight beam. The battery's nearly dead, the circle of light shivering with each breath I take. Branches loom like twisted bone hands, reaching out at the edges. Something slides at the fringe of the beam, too slow to be wind. I freeze. A footprint half buried in wet soil gleams with unnatural sharpness. Not human. I crouch, fingertips hovering above the cuts, skin taut with nausea. The mud's edges jet like glass shards, raw, angry. The shape curls in an impossible spiral, deep gouges still slick with sap that smells like rot and iron. A wave of bile rises. I gag, but nothing comes up. My heel plunges into muck. Cold slime oozes up around my ankle like worms wrapping tight, pulling skin away. I wrench free and stumble inside, heart hammering against my ribs. The fog thickens around the house, curling like breath leaking from cracks. It smells sour, sweet, sickening, rotted leaves layered over something deeper and foul, as if decay itself seeped up from the soil. My mouth floods with metallic bitterness. My teeth ache. The taste creeps up the back of my throat like rusted wires. I gag again, useless. Inside, I slam the door. The frame shudders as if something just brushed against it, testing its seams. The stale air thickens at once. My skin crawls. I press both palms flat against the counter. The wood feels clammy and slick. My fingers buzz with sharp needles, as if live wires sparked beneath the surface. Stay inside, I whisper. Softer now, as if louder might tear the walls apart. The words hum along the edges of the room. The phone flickers alive like a dying eye. Lines of code crawl like insects across the screen. I scroll, but the pages won't load. Numbers smear together, unreadable. An alert flashes for half a second. Do not approach the orchards. Contact incoming. Gone before I can act. I slam the phone shut. It trembles in my hand like something breathing. The clock's tick lurches into my skull, too loud, too sharp, hammering like iron striking bone. I pace barefoot. The floor's chill sucks heat from my soles. Every step echoes, as if I'm stomping through hollow chambers beneath the house. I pull the curtains tighter. The dark thickens at the edges, crawling inward like ink poured along the seams. For a brief second the orchard's outline pulses faintly, not light, but a slow, sick rhythm under the glass skin. I press my forehead to the pane. It's slick with sweat, cold against my skin. The branches bend toward me. Bare limbs twist inward like fingers stretching through cracks. A wave of crawling sensation sweeps my scalp and spine. My skin ripples. I flinch back. Stay inside, I whisper. My lips barely move. The words dry in my mouth. They feel hollow already. I slump against the wall, knees pulled tight. My arms clamp around them, like they're the only thing holding me upright. Images flicker behind my eyes. Neighbors' faces slack and pale, eyes filmed over, mouths open but silent. Shapes slide between trunks, slick as worms. My skin itches beneath my sleeves. I scratch until the flesh reddens. I press my palms to my eyes. Behind closed lids the dark throbs in time with my heartbeat. When I open them, the orchard's edge leans in closer. The branches bend as if sniffing the air. I drag the curtains shut. At the kitchen table, I try to write, but my hand shakes. The pen scrapes, leaving jagged trails. Ink splashes like blood across the page. I force myself to scrawl anyway. It's watching. It breathes. It knows when I move. Stay inside. The words swim before my eyes, edges curling like leaves rotting at the margins. I stop. My breath comes ragged. My tongue tastes of iron. A low sound rises from outside. Not wind. Not animals. A wet, deliberate breathing. It slides through the silence like damp fingers brushing skin, slow, patient, hungry. I freeze. Every muscle clenched. The sound grows nearer, pulsing with my heartbeat. My throat tightens. Air won't come. The orchard's edge bends inward more, branches twitching like antennae probing. I press my hands flat to the table. Nails dig into wood. The grain leaves splinters in my skin. Stay inside, I whisper again. It's barely breath, broken by a tremor in my chest. I don't know how long I sit. The house breathes with me, hollow and wet. The orchard leans, ribs taut, branches curling inward like hands waiting to drag me in. I keep telling myself to stay inside. But even now, writing this, sweat crawling down my neck, I wonder if it's always listening. If it's never stopped. The scratches came overnight. I woke with a burning itch along my forearm. By the time I peeled back the sleeve, the skin was broken in thin red lines, tiny, shallow at first, like a child clawing at bark. But they traced a spiral, branching out with deliberate cruelty, edges raised and wet. I poked one with a fingernail. It pulsed. The blood welled dark, sluggish, with black specks clinging to the edges like grains of sand fused with rot. I screamed and shoved the sleeve down, fingers trembling. The orchard hasn't moved in days, not even in wind. But I swear it's still breathing. I smell it when I try to sleep, sour, sweet, crawling into my mouth like metal filings stirred into water. I scrubbed the scratches with bottled water until my skin flaked away, but the lines only deepened, angry veins snaking up toward my elbow. I could feel something crawling beneath, restless and deliberate. I keep telling myself it's nothing, just bacteria, or stress. But when I look, I see the spirals, angles too perfect to be random. The fridge door sticks now. I pulled it open this morning, and the handle left a smear on my palm, thick, dark, greasy. It clung to my skin like oil mixed with ash. I wiped it on the counter, but the stains spread, feathering like roots reaching outward. The milk curdled in hours, bloomed with gray fuzz that pulsed when I stared at it too long. I threw it out, but the smell lingered, sour and metallic, settling in the corners of my mouth. I haven't slept. Every time I close my eyes, faces press against the inside of my skull. The neighbor's dog, missing for days, stares at me with pale, glazed eyes, tongue lolling as if it knows what's coming. The old woman from the end of the street, mouth stretched too wide, skin flaking off like bark. Their eyes plead, accusing, and when I turn to check, the room's empty. I press my hands over my ears. The whispers continue, low and wet, like breath brushing the skin. The clock spins faster than it should. I check the battery full, but the second hand stutters, jerks ahead, lurches, as if it's pulling time from somewhere else. I slap it back into place. It laughs in the silence, a hollow click after each movement. The alerts barely load anymore. Lines of code crawl like worms across the screen, twisting over each other. I try to scroll through old warnings, but the pages blur into unreadable smears. A flash appears for half a second, evacuate. Contamination extreme. Gone before I can tap it. I slam the phone down until the screen cracks, lines spiderwebbing across the glass like frozen veins. I don't trust my reflection anymore. When I brush my hair, I see eyes staring back from the mirror, too wide, too pale, stretched along the edges. Sometimes the skin looks mottled, blotched, peeling like dry bark. I stare until the features blur. When I look away, the shape lingers in the dark, crouched just outside the frame. I check the windows again. The corners of the glass sweat beads of dark moisture that pulse and drip down like tears of oil. When I rub them, my fingers come away slick, coated in a cold residue that smells sharp and metallic. I try washing them with bleach. The stains return by morning, tracing spirals that curl toward the center. I've begun to trace the scratches on my skin with a dull knife. The skin resists, swelling with irritation. I scratch until raw, until the blood weeps in thin black streams, and still it spreads. The edges seem to pulse at night, hardening like scales. I stop after each session, press my palms to my face, and whisper the same line over and over until the words fray. Stay inside. Sometimes it's barely breath. Sometimes it's a scream that catches and dies in my throat. The smell worsens. It creeps into cloth, towels, furniture, rotted leaves mixed with something sweet and sickening. I burn sheets, scrub counters, spray disinfectant until my hands crack, but it returns. The air itself seems alive. When I breathe, my chest aches. Every inhale scrapes like sandpaper against raw flesh. The orchard hasn't moved. Not in days. But when I look too long, the branches curve inward, like fingers stretching toward me through glass. The bark seems slick, glistening, veins crawling like small rivers across its surface. I blink and it's normal again. I keep a journal beside my bed. The pages are thick with notes, warnings, scribbled diagrams of spirals, frantic scrawls that twist like the scratches on my skin. I try to anchor myself with routine. Check locks, boil water, inspect food. But each task collapses in seconds. Today I boiled water 3 times. It curdled before I poured it. I tried washing my hands. The water darkened, thick as blood, swirling with tiny black threads before sinking out of sight. At night, I hear it breathing just outside. Slow, wet, a rhythm that syncs with my heart. It doesn't grow louder. It doesn't stop. It waits. I wonder if the corruption started when I ignored the first signs. When I saw the footprints and walked past. When I told myself it was wind. When I didn't look too long. I traced the spirals one more time with the tip of a knife. The edges swell, bright red, tender as new skin. I press harder until the tip sinks deep. Pain explodes. I yank it away, hands slick with blood. The lines pulse like a heartbeat. I scream into my palms. The sound dies against the walls. I press my face into the table, breath ragged. Stay inside, I whisper. The words scrape my throat raw. But they are all I have. The scratches have worsened. I woke gasping, skin stretched painfully tight along my forearm. The spiral cuts throbbed, edges jagged and wet, dark blood crusting like dried paint. I traced one with my thumb and felt something stir beneath the surface, muscles shifting, restless. The blood didn't clot. It slid slowly, stubborn, like it refused to leave me. I scratched until raw. My nails tore open the skin, but the lines only darkened and spread, branching toward my elbow in patterns I recognized, like the veins in my mother's hands before she died. Her skin was pale and paper-thin. I remember running my fingers along those brittle lines, promising I'd care for her. But I left. I walked away. Now the spirals reach for that same hollow space. The smell is worse. Not sour this time. Sweet and thick, cloying like burnt sugar poured over damp moss. It clings to the sheets, the curtains, even my hair, creeping into the places I can't reach. I wash my hands until they crack. The skin flakes like dry petals, but the scent lingers. I breathe shallow to avoid it, but it finds me anyway, seeping through pores, coating my tongue, making my teeth ache. The faucet drips black. I turned it on, hoping for clean water, but the stream ran sluggish, thickened with dark sediment that clung to porcelain like spilled oil. Each drop hung a moment longer than it should before falling with a soft, sickening plop. I touched the water. It slid over my fingertips, slick and cold, sticking as if alive. The fridge hums differently now. A low growl rumbles beneath its motor. The sound pulses irregularly, matching my heartbeat before slipping out of sync, as if it's trying to imitate me. At night, it sinks again, soft, wet breaths brushing against bone. The clock's second hand stutters wildly. I press my palm against the glass. It jolts ahead, pauses, jerks again like a trapped insect trying to escape. I slap it. The hands leap violently before slowing, as if resisting. The mirror shows things I shouldn't see. Today, brushing my hair, I froze. The eyes staring back were glazed with fever, lids crusted, lashes clumped together. The skin mottled with pale patches like disease eating flesh from within. But it wasn't my face alone. For a moment, the neighbor's face flickered behind mine, eyes sunken, mouth slack, lips cracking as if screaming without sound. I blinked. The reflection returned to normal. I dream of him, the neighbor from across the alley. He used to sit on his porch when the sun fell, humming old songs. I avoided him. His kindness made me uncomfortable, too direct, too patient. In the dream, he crawls through the orchard, limbs twisted, face stretched like wet paper. He reaches toward me silently, eyes pleading. I wake, biting my wrist until it bleeds. I lit incense to mask the smell. The smoke rose thick and blue, curling around itself like restless tendrils. For a moment, the haze shifted, shapes forming in the spirals, hands, faces, twisting forms. They whispered fragments of old conversations I barely remembered. You should have checked. You turned away. You left us. I crushed the sticks until ash spilled, but the scent remained. I trace spirals on my skin with ointment. The pain sharpens, bright and sudden like a lightning strike. I press harder, digging until the skin splits and bleeds. But the lines only darken further, spreading outward like ink in water. I trace another spiral around the first, trying to erase it. The walls sweat at night, not with clear moisture. Thick, black streaks bloom from corners, pulsating gently as if breathing. I scratch at them with my fingernails until plaster flakes fall, but the veins creep farther by morning, curling toward the center like roots seeking life. The orchard's edge leans closer. I see it in reflections, in the soft shimmer at the window's edge. The branches bow inward, limbs twisting like claws. For a breathless second, I imagine them snapping through glass, grasping for me. I stare until the image fades, but it returns when I blink. The air thickens, not with smell this time, but pressure, heavy, humid, suffocating like the moment before a storm. It presses against my lungs, making each breath a battle. I gasp, but it only worsens. I cannot sleep. Every time I close my eyes, images bloom. The neighbor's outstretched hands, the way he used to look at me as if waiting, expecting something I never gave. I hear him calling in dreams, not his name, but something worse. Something broken. I try to eat, but food twists in my mouth. Bread crumbles into bitter dust, metal tang sharp against the tongue. Even fruit tastes off, as if grown in soil that remembers rot. I gag until nothing remains but dry heaves and an aching stomach. I press my ear to the fridge again. The growl deepens, no longer mechanical, but wet and deliberate, like lungs drawing in air through rotted flesh. It sinks again with my pulse. I light another candle. The flame sputters, bending sideways like it's trying to flee, before flaring wildly and dying altogether. Darkness floods the kitchen, thick as wool. I write this now by candlelight. The scratches crawl toward my elbow like veins feeding on my own blood. The air thickens with memories I cannot hold back. I trace one more spiral with ointment. It burns bright, then dulls, then pulses again as if something beneath watches through the skin. I press my face into my arm. "Stay inside," I whisper. But the words come out hoarse, fragmented. Breathless pleas instead of warnings. I listen. The house hums with something more than sound. It's always listening. The spirals have thickened. They no longer feel like scratches. They rise above my skin. Hard, ridged lines twisting toward my joints like roots pushing through flesh. When I flex, the skin pulls tight, and pain flares sharp before dulling into a deep ache that hums like an echo. Sometimes it spasms without warning. I jerk as if something beneath me stirs, crawling. I trace a line with my fingertip. The skin ripples back, soft, alive, and my stomach turns. The air stinks again. Not just sour or metallic, something cloying, sweet and damp, like rotten fruit left in a hospital bin beside antiseptic trays and wet gauze. The smell fills the room, thickening in my lungs until I gag. It's the smell from the ward when I last saw my mother. Her hands, thin and pale, rested on the sheet, veins dark and brittle beneath the skin. I had promised I'd stay. I left instead. The scent crawls over my tongue, clings to my teeth. The faucet drips like a wound that won't close. The water slithers from the tap in thick dark beads, reluctant to fall, clinging like coagulated blood. Each drop pauses, swells, then slips with a soft wet plop that echoes in the silence. I touch the stream. Cold, slick, clinging. It pulls at my fingers like skin. The refrigerator hums like breath. The sound isn't steady anymore. It drags against itself, wet, guttural, like lungs drawing air through something clogged. At times it syncs with my pulse. At others, it stutters, mocking me, pulling me out of rhythm. At night it grows louder, almost a voice brushing against the walls. The clock jerks erratically. I press my palm against the glass. The second hand shudders, leaps ahead, stalls, then stutters like something trapped beneath the face trying to break free. The ticking scrapes inside my skull, each pause a breath held too long, each surge a gasp that rattles my teeth. I tried to eat today. The bread crumbled beneath my fingers, fibers slithering like worms pressed deep into the soft flesh. I tore off a piece, shoved it into my mouth, and the taste hit like iron filings ground into paste. Bitter, choking. I spat it out. It clung to my tongue like ash. Even now, the scent lingers, a sick sweetness that rises from the crumbs, mixing with the damp, hospital air. The mirror stares back. I brush my hair and freeze. My eyes are bloodshot, filmed with fever, lids crusted as if sweat had dried and hardened into brittle scabs. Patches of skin peel away like soft bark in rain. For a breath, the neighbor's face flickers behind mine, hollow, eyes pleading, lips split as if screaming without sound. I turn away. When I look back, it's gone. But the hollowness lingers. He comes in dreams. The neighbor from across the alley, quiet eyes, patient smile, crawls through the orchard at night, limbs twisted wrong, mouth stretched too wide, eyes rolled back in silent screams. He reaches toward me, hands trembling like branches in wind. I wake biting into my wrist until it bleeds raw. The wall's sweat veins. Dark streaks bloom from corners, curling inward like roots feeding on damp plaster. They pulse, slow and deliberate, thick with moisture that glistens like blood beneath paint. I scratch at them until plaster flakes fall, but by morning the veins have spread, curling toward the center like something eager to reach. The air presses down. It's heavy, wet, suffocating, not with smell alone but weight. Breath scrape my chest as if dragged through wet cloth. I gasp, claw at my throat, but it tightens, suffocating. I press my hands to my ribs until they ache, but it only thickens. The kitchen smells sickly sweet. It clings to the counters, the knife handle, my skin, thick as syrup left too long in heat, rotten and inviting. I scrub until my hands crack, but the scent returns by morning, sharp and invasive, coating the back of my throat. The alerts glitch worse. When I touch the phone, warnings flash like fireflies. Exposure critical, isolate immediately, before melting into static. Sometimes letters crawl like worms, reversing, twisting. I slam the glass against the wall. The spiderweb cracks bloom like veins spreading toward the edges. I trace spirals until the pain consumes me. The ointment stings, but I press harder, digging until skin tears and blood beads thick and slow, clinging like syrup. The lines darken, pulsing with each breath. I trace another spiral over the first, desperate to erase it, but it only sharpens. The orchard leans in reflections. I see it in the window's edge, bending inward, branches twisted like claws reaching through glass. For a breath it's there, wet bark glistening, limbs arching like fingers. I blink. It's gone. Blink again. Closer. The floorboards slick with sweat. I step barefoot. Cold film clings like damp cloth. The air thickens, crawling into my lungs, coating every breath until I gag. I scrub the floor with bleach until skin peels, but the film returns by morning, spreading like mold. The silence hums. Not wind, not electricity, something deeper. A low, wet rhythm that syncs with my heartbeat, drags me out of rhythm, pulls at the edges of sound. I press my ear against the wall until it throbs against bone. I draw spirals in the dark with my fingers. The patterns pulse beneath my skin, glowing faint red in candlelight. My arm twitches. I bite the edge of my sleeve until blood beads on my lip. I press my face into my arm. The spirals pulse, throbbing like second heartbeats beneath the skin. I whisper until my voice cracks. Stay inside. The words splinter like dry twigs. Breathless. Broken. I listen. The house breathes with me. The orchard waits. Always listening. The spirals have become wounds. They no longer feel like raised lines, but angry ridges curling around bone, tender and swollen. When I flex, sharp pain blooms like fire and then sinks into a dull, pulsing ache that hums with my heartbeat. Sometimes the muscle spasms on its own, as if something beneath it twitches, trying to break free. I dig my nails into the skin to stop myself from clawing them open. The ridges twitch again. The air suffocates me. It's thick with a sick sweetness and the damp rot of forgotten fruit, sticky and cloying like syrup spilled over moldy sheets. It scrapes my throat each time I breathe, wrapping me in a damp weight that drags me down. When I choke, dizziness spirals in fast, spinning the room until it feels like the walls tilt toward me. It's the smell of that hospital, wet gauze, antiseptic, sweat-soaked linen. I left my mother alone that night, promised I'd stay. Now the scent crawls along my spine, fingering the cracks in my skin. The faucet doesn't drip, it bleeds. Dark droplets swell and hang from the tap's edge like fat beads of blood. Each droplet clings, reluctant to fall, its surface thick and slow. When one slips, it lands with a soft plop, echoing through the kitchen like a second heartbeat. I press my fingers beneath the stream. Cold slime coats my skin like living skin. It grips and slides with a wet sigh. The refrigerator growls. Its hum is no longer mechanical but wet and deliberate. It syncs with my pulse one moment, then drags against it the next, pulling my head out of rhythm until pain flares sharp in my temples. At times it breathes through the vents, a rasping inhalation that makes my chest seize. Last night it whispered something. I pressed my ear to the door, but heard only broken words that slithered away before I could understand. The clock jerks like a trapped insect. Its second hand leaps, freezes, then stumbles forward in spasms that scrape my teeth. I press my temple against the glass, willing it to settle, but the stuttering only grows louder inside my skull until each tick scrapes like bone against bone. The mirror stares. I brush my hair and freeze. My eyes are swollen, filmed with fever. The lids crust with flakes like dried blood, and patches of skin peel like wet bark. For a breath, another face hovers behind mine, hollow-eyed, lips split open in a silent scream. I turn. The reflection ripples, then steadies. But the hollowness remains, stretching the edges of my vision like a wound. He crawls toward me in dreams. The neighbor's face, patient and kind by day, melts into grotesque hunger at night. His limbs twist wrong, joints bending like broken branches. His eyes roll white, pleading soundlessly as he crawls through the orchard's thickening fog. I wake biting my wrist until blood beads at the edge of my teeth. The walls breathe veins. Dark streaks bloom from damp corners, curling inward like roots feeding on plaster. Moisture glistens along their edges, thick and slow as blood pooling beneath paint. I scratch them until flakes fall, but by morning the veins spread farther, curling like claws ready to grip. The floorboards sweat beneath my feet. A cold, slick film rises with every breath I take. It creeps between my toes, clinging like wet cloth pulled from stagnant water. When I step, it yields with a sucking sound that lingers, making each movement feel slow, uncertain. I scrub until the skin peels, but by morning the film returns, darker and more invasive. The air presses down like iron. Not merely humid, it weighs on my chest, forcing shallow, rasping breaths that scrape like glass. I gasp and claw at my ribs, but the pressure only tightens, wrapping around me like a living thing. The dizziness spins faster, pulling me toward the floor until I stagger and collapse against the wall, breathless and hollow-eyed. The alerts crawl. When I touch the phone, warnings flash like broken stuttering fireflies. Exposure critical. Isolate immediately, contact lost, before melting into static noise. Letters stretch, reverse, and twist like worms burrowing into glass. I slam it against the wall until cracks spider outward like veins trying to escape. The bread rots in hours. Each slice crumbles beneath my fingers into fibers that slip like worms from soft flesh. I tear off a piece and shove it into my mouth despite the hunger clawing at me. The taste is sharp and bitter, like rust ground into paste. It clings to my tongue, numbing it, until I gag and spit it out. The smell lingers, sweet and choking, mixing with the damp rot suffocating the room. I trace spirals until the pain overtakes me. The ointment burns with a sudden crack like lightning, then dulls to a throbbing pulse that sinks deep into the tissue. I press harder, digging until skin tears and blood beads dark, thick, sticky as syrup. I trace over it again and again, desperate to erase the spirals. They sharpen, pulsing with each breath like a second heartbeat beneath the skin. The orchard leans close. I see its branches arching inward through reflections at the window's edge. Wet bark glistens like skin slick with sweat. Fingers stretch through glass, curling toward me. For a breath it's there, hungry, patient. I blink and it disappears. Blink again, it's closer. The silence hums. Not wind, not electricity. A low, wet rhythm that syncs with my pulse, then drags it out of time like fingers combing bone. I press my ear against the wall until the rhythm throbs against my skull. I whisper until my lips split. Stay inside. The words crack like dry twigs, breathless and broken. Sometimes I forget them mid-sentence. Sometimes they vanish before they leave my mouth. The silence waits with me. The orchard listens. The spirals have become open wounds. Their swollen ridges curling around my joints, pulsing with every breath like veins trying to escape. When I flex, sharp pain flares, then drains into a dull ache that throbs beneath the skin. At times the muscles spasm without warning, jerking my arm like something clawing from inside. I bite my nails until they split, trying to keep from tearing at the flesh. The air suffocates me, wet, heavy, invasive. It clings to my skin, slipping beneath sleeves, curling around my neck like cold fingers. Each breath scrapes my throat raw, and with every gasp, dizziness floods my vision. The room tilts toward me until I stagger, clutching the wall, breathless. It smells sweet and cloying, like spilled syrup gone sour, mixed with damp rot and the antiseptic sting of hospital corridors. I gag and choke until bile rises, but it clings to my tongue, coating it with a sick metallic bitterness that stings the back of my throat. It's the same smell from the night I left my mother alone in that hospital room. Sheets damp with sweat, eyes staring past me in silence. Now it crawls up my spine with each breath. The refrigerator hums like a throat congested with wet breath. It syncs with my pulse 1 second and then drags it out of rhythm the next, rasping through the walls as if something unseen exhales and inhales with deliberate slowness. At times it growls low and wet, vibrating the floor beneath me until I stagger. When I press my ear against its door, the sound wraps around my skull like fingers combing bone, pulling me deeper into a dull ache that leaves my head pounding. The faucet bleeds. Dark droplets swell at its edge, clinging thick and slow like coagulated blood before falling with a soft sigh that echoes in the silence. I touch them with trembling fingers. Cold slime slides like living skin, sticky and reluctant to release. I scrub until my hands crack and sting raw, but by morning the slick returns, darker, thicker, wrapping itself like mold. The clock stutters like a trapped insect. Its second hand jerks, races, freezes again, scraping against glass like bone against bone. I slap it, but the jerks grow sharper. I press my forehead to the frame, willing it to settle, but it only throbs harder, pulsing against my skin like a second heartbeat that refuses to stop. The mirror shows rot. When I brush my hair, my eyes are bloodshot, filmed with fever. The lids crust over, lashes clumped like dried blood, and patches of skin peel like bark soaking in rain. Behind me, another face flickers, hollow eyes, slack mouth split into a scream. It reaches without sound, distorted beyond recognition. I spin around, breath catching. The hallway is empty. When I look back, the reflection steadies, but the hollowness lingers in the edges of my vision. The bread rots overnight. I tear a piece and shove it into my mouth despite the hunger clawing at my ribs. The texture crumbles like soft flesh, fibers writhing deep beneath the surface. The taste hits sharp, metallic, like rust ground into paste, bitter and thick enough to numb my tongue. I spit it out, choking, but even rinsing my mouth leaves the taste clinging like ash, mingling with the wet rot that fills the room. The alerts glitch into nonsense. I tap the phone screen. Broken warnings flash, isolate, exposure, contact lost, before melting into static. Letters stretch and crawl like worms across the glass, twisting backward, merging into shapes that dissolve before I can read them. I slam the phone against the wall. The glass cracks spiderweb-like, spreading dark veins outward as if trying to claw their way free. The floor sweats. Barefoot, I feel cold moisture crawling between my toes like wet cloth pulled from stagnant water. The slickness clings to skin with suffocating insistence, making every step feel slow, uncertain. I scrub until my hands bleed, but by morning the film returns, heavier and thicker, spreading silently like mold feeding off me. The walls pulse veins. Dark streaks bloom from corners like roots, curling inward with deliberate slowness. Moisture glistens along the edges like fresh blood beneath plaster. I scratch at them, peeling flakes loose until skin on my fingertips tears, but by morning the veins have spread farther, curling like claws ready to grip. The orchard leans closer. Through the window's edge, branches arch inward, limbs twisted like claws reaching through glass. Bark glistens wet, slick as sweat. For a breath it's there, hungry, patient, before I blink and it vanishes. Blink again and it's closer, pressing against the pane like something alive. The silence hums. Not wind, not wires, something deeper. A low, wet rhythm syncs with my heartbeat, then drags it out of time, pulling at the edges of sound like fingers combing bone. I press my ear against the wall until the throb consumes me, sending chills crawling down my back. The spirals burn. The ointment stings sharp as lightning before sinking into a dull ache that pulses beneath the skin like a second heartbeat. I press harder, digging until raw blood beads thick and sticky, clinging like syrup. I trace another spiral, desperate to erase it, but it only sharpens, feeding on the pressure like a parasite. The neighbor crawls through dreams. His limbs twist wrong, joints bending like branches snapped in a storm. His skin peels in ragged strips, mottled with decay. His eyes roll white with pleading silence as he crawls toward me through thick fog. I wake biting into my wrist until the skin breaks, blood hot and sticky on my lips. I whisper until my throat splinters. Stay inside. The words crack like dry twigs, breathless and broken. Sometimes I forget them mid-sentence. Sometimes they vanish before leaving my lips. The silence waits. The orchard breathes with me. Always listening. The air is suffocating, wet, cold, invasive. It crawls along my skin in threads like icy fingers, sliding beneath sleeves, curling around my neck. Breath scratch my throat raw. Each inhale feels like pulling glass shards into my lungs, each exhale dragging me deeper into silence. A sick sweetness clings to everything, damp rot, syrup left too long, antiseptic stinging like iron filings. It coats the back of my tongue until I gag. My stomach knots, but it clings, crawling into every pore. It's the smell of that hospital corridor, the night I left my mother alone. Now it presses against me, wet and breathing. The lesions split open. Ridges of inflamed skin pulse with a dark fluid that crawls toward my joints like veins hunting bone. I scratch until raw flesh shows, but the cuts throb, rippling like something alive, feeding on pain. I press ointment into the cracks. It burns sharp, then dulls into a deeper ache. For a moment, the spirals pulse harder, as if my touch is feeding them. The refrigerator breathes through the walls. Its low hum syncs with my heartbeat, then drags it out of rhythm. Wet, deliberate, like lungs rasping breath through something clogged. The sound wraps around me, curling along the edges of my skin until I stagger. When I press my ear to the metal, the hum thickens into a wet inhalation that shudders through bone, followed by a slow exhale that scrapes like claws combing muscle. The dizziness that floods my eyes lasts until I collapse against the door. The faucet weeps blood. Dark drops swell at the edge like clotted veins, thick and slow, clinging before falling with a soft sigh that echoes through the silence. I touch them. Cold slime slides along my fingers like living skin. When I scrub it away, it crawls back overnight, thicker, darker. The floorboards sweat beneath my feet. A cold slick rises between toes and clings like wet cloth. Each step feels slow, uncertain, as if the wood itself breathes with me. I scrub until my hands crack open, but by morning it spreads silently, wrapping edges like mold feeding off my skin. The clock jerks like a trapped insect. Its second hand leaps, freezes, stumbles forward again, scraping glass like bone grinding against bone. I slap it, but the spasms only grow sharper. I press my brow to it, willing it to settle, but it throbs harder, matching the rhythm of my own pounding skull. The mirror fractures. When I brush my hair, fevered eyes stare back swollen, encrusted with dried blood. Skin peels in jagged strips like rotting bark. Behind me, another face flickers, a bloated mouth split open, eyes rolled white, reaching toward me without sound. I spin. The hallway is empty. I turn back. The reflection steadies, but the hollowness lingers like shadows curling at the edges of sight. The bread sours. I tear a piece and shove it into my mouth, teeth sinking into soft flesh writhing with worms. The taste is bitter, metallic, sharp enough to numb my tongue. I gag until tears flood my cheeks, but even rinsing with water leaves it clinging, coating my throat like ash. The alerts glitch violently. Warnings flash for a breath, isolate, exposure, contact lost, before dissolving into static. Letters crawl like worms across glass, twisting backward into shapes that melt before I can read them. I slam the phone against the wall. Cracks spider outward like veins splitting bone. The orchard leans through reflections. Branches arch inward, limbs bent like claws clawing at glass. Bark glistens wet, slick as sweat. For a breath it's there, hungry, patient. I blink. It vanishes. Blink again and it's closer, pressing against the pane like something alive. The walls pulse. Dark veins bloom from damp corners, curling inward slowly like roots feeding on plaster. Moisture glistens like blood beneath skin. I scratch until my fingers tear loose flakes, but by morning the veins have spread farther, wrapping edges like claws searching for purchase. The silence hums deeper. A wet rhythm syncs with my pulse before dragging it out of time. It wraps around me like invisible tendrils, combing bone, pulling sound into stillness. I press my ear against the wall until my vision blurs, dizziness spinning the room into shifting shapes. The chills strike without warning. A sudden wave of cold surges from spine to fingertips, freezing me mid-breath. My muscles spasm, fingers numb and useless as I claw at air. The chill lingers like liquid ice beneath skin, sinking deeper with every breath. The dizziness sharpens. The room tilts toward me, walls warping as if breathing. My vision doubles and blurs, edges softening. I stagger, grabbing at the air, but my fingers miss until I crash against the wall, gasping. The ringing begins then, high, thin like a blade slicing through bone, stretching until it consumes the edges of sound. The neighbor crawls through dreams. His limbs bend wrong, joints snapping like broken branches. His skin peels in strips, mottled and raw, eyes rolled back in pleading silence. He reaches toward me with trembling hands like wind-tossed twigs. I wake biting my wrist until blood beads at the edge of my lips. The rituals unravel. I whisper, "Stay inside," until breathless fragments splinter like dry twigs. Sometimes I forget the words mid-sentence. Sometimes they dissolve before leaving my lips, replaced by silence pressing against my skin. I trace spirals along my arm with shaking fingers, digging until raw blood beads sticky and dark. I press harder, desperate to erase the pain, but it sharpens, feeding on pressure like a parasite feeding on flesh. The orchard waits. Its limbs stretch toward me through reflections, wet, glistening, arching like fingers eager to tear through glass. I stare until my eyes burn, but it waits. Always watching, always listening. The spirals scream beneath my skin. They've burst open, jagged ridges curling deep around bone, raw flesh split and slick with thick black fluid that pulses like veins dragging blood outward. I scratch until my nails shred, tearing skin away in frantic strokes. The wounds ripple in response, alive, hungry, writhing like something clawing from inside. The ointment burns like lightning stabbing muscle, then sinks deeper, only for the ache to sharpen. It feeds off my touch, a parasite that thrives on pain. I claw harder, blood flooding the grooves in thick, sticky beads that pulse and slide like wet worms refusing to let go. The air devours me. Cold threads snake beneath my sleeves, slither down my spine, wrap my neck like icy hands. Every breath scrapes my throat raw, jagged shards cutting deeper. I gasp, but the pressure tightens, suffocating, pulling me inward until I stumble. The smell thickens, sweet rot, sour dampness, metal rust, coating my tongue like sludge. It crawls into my lungs, coating them in bitterness that clings like mold. I cough while spilling into my mouth, but the suffocating sweetness clings to skin, hair, pores, crawling inward like a second skin. My chest tightens until it seizes. I claw at ribs until nails gouge skin, but it only tightens, pulling deeper with each breath, relentless. The refrigerator roars with life. Its low hum grows louder, thick and wet, sinking with my pulse before dragging it out of rhythm. It breathes slow and deliberate, as if lungs rasp through clogged flesh. The sound coils around me, brushing bone like claws scraping muscle. I press my ear to the cold metal. The growl thickens, deepening into a wet rasp that claws along bone. My head spins violently. The walls bend inward, curving like drowning water. I stagger, hands trembling, heart racing. The faucet bleeds. Dark drops swell, thick and clotted like veins strangled before birth. They cling at the spout's edge, reluctant before sliding free with a soft sigh that echoes like breath stolen. I touch them. Cold slime clings like skin alive, gripping my fingertips as if crawling inward. I swipe, but it resists, wrapping around my hands with a suffocating patience, crawling deeper by morning, feeding like mold on fear. The floorboards sweat death. Cold slick creeps up between my toes, sticky and suffocating like wet cloth dragged from stagnant pools. It clings, patient, invasive, wrapping each step in slow dread. I scrub until my hands split open, raw and burning. The blood mixes with sweat, sticky and useless, but by morning the film returns, darker, thicker, invading gaps like a living thing feeding beneath my skin. The clock thrashes like a trapped thing. Its second hand jerks, freezes, races, scraping glass like bone grinding bone. I slap it until skin tears, but it only jerks harder, mocking me. I press my forehead against the frame, begging it to stop, but it drags against my skull in rhythm with my pulse, pulling me deeper into dizzy spirals that threaten to swallow me whole. The mirror rots and bleeds. My eyes stare swollen, bloodshot, lids crusted with flakes of dried blood clinging like weed roots strangling flesh. Skin peels in jagged strips, exposing raw muscle beneath like bark soaked in decay. For an instant, another face blooms, bloated, split-mouthed, eyes rolled back in pleading silence. It stretches toward me soundlessly, fingers clawing at glass. I spin too fast, knocking furniture aside. The hallway is empty. I turn back, but my reflection steadies only half. Hollowness pools at the corners of my vision like shadows breathing in weight. The alerts shriek and fracture. Isolate bursts across the screen like lightning, shattering into jagged shards of static. Exposure twists into crawling lines that writhe like veins before melting into noise. Contact lost worms across glass, twisting backward like veins desperate to escape, before dissolving into incoherent streaks. I slam the phone against the wall. The glass splinters outward like dark roots splitting bone, creeping toward edges like claws searching for escape. The orchard claws through the glass. Branches arch inward, twisted like skeletal fingers. Bark gleams wet and slick as sweat, trembling with patient hunger. It presses against the window's edge, eager, waiting. I blink, and it vanishes. I blink again, and it's closer, more desperate, crawling toward me with impossible speed. The walls pulse veins of blood. Dark streaks erupt from corners, curling inward like roots feeding on damp plaster. Moisture gleams fresh beneath paint, thick and deliberate. It pulses in time with my heartbeat, beckoning. I scratch until skin tears open and flakes fall, but the veins only spread farther overnight, wrapping edges like claws eager to tear deeper. The silence hums with teeth. A wet rhythm syncs with my pulse, dragging it out of time, combing through sound like claws brushing bone. I press my ear to the wall, breath shallow, until dizziness floods sight and the room warps inward like water swallowing me. The chills strike like knives. A wave of ice crashes from spine to fingertips, freezing muscles mid-breath. My limbs convulse, fingers limp and useless, skin turning numb. I claw at air, desperate, but the cold tightens, sinking like liquid ice beneath flesh. The ringing slices bone. High, thin, sharp, a blade carving deep grooves into my skull. It hums at the edge of hearing until sound shatters, dissolving into pulsing pressure behind my eyes. I claw at my ears until nails tear skin, but it tightens, swallowing thought and breath alike. The neighbor crawls closer. His limbs twist impossibly wrong, joints snapping like branches broken in storms. His skin peels in ragged strips, mottled raw and wet. His eyes roll white in pleading silence as he crawls through thick fog, hands trembling like twigs ripped by wind. I wake biting into my wrist until skin splits, blood hot and sticky against my lips. The rituals fracture. I whisper, stay inside, until breathless fragments splinter like dry twigs breaking apart. Sometimes I forget mid-sentence. Sometimes the words vanish, replaced by silence pressing against me like living flesh waiting to consume me. I trace spirals along my arm with shaking fingers, digging until raw blood beads dark and sticky. I press harder, desperate to erase the pain, but it sharpens, feeding off pressure like a parasite ravenous for flesh. The orchard waits. Its limbs stretch through reflections, wet and gleaming, arching like fingers eager to tear through glass. I stare until my eyes burn raw, but it waits, unblinking, patient, watching. Always listening. The spirals scream. They've burst open like ripped flesh. Jagged ridges coil deep into bone, veins crawling outward with wet insistence, dark fluids slick and thick as blood pulsing toward the surface. I claw at them until skin peels and splinters, but they writhe, alive beneath the cuts, pulling new lines like roots searching deeper. I rub ointment into the cracks. Fire explodes through muscle. The sting crawls inward, feeding on the pain. My fingers scrape harder, nails biting into raw flesh. Blood wells, hot and sticky, sliding over my wrists like worms that refuse to die. The air claws. Cold, wet strands slip beneath sleeves, crawl along bone, press into skin like teeth. I gasp, but each breath scrapes against raw muscle, grinding like metal shards in a throat too tight to breathe. The rot thickens, sweet, sticky, metallic. It crawls down the back of my tongue, coating it with sludge that clings like glue. It slides into my lungs with every breath until coughing tears through me. Even bile tastes of it, sour, sticky, relentless, clinging to the inside of my mouth, crawling into skin folds as if breathing for me. I claw at my ribs until nails gouge deep, but the air only tightens, dragging harder. The refrigerator breathes. Its low hum grows thick, wet, crawling along bone like claws combing muscle. It syncs with my pulse, then drags it out of rhythm, pulling breath and thought from me with animal patience. I press my ear to the cold metal. The growl deepens into a rasp that scrapes bone like fingernails tearing muscle. My head swims. Walls warp inward like water folding in on itself. I stumble, heart racing, breath shattering against frozen terror. The faucet bleeds. Dark drops bulge at the spout's edge, thick as clotted veins, reluctant before sliding free. They tremble, then fall with a soft sigh that echoes long after the sound dies. I touch them. Cold slime grips my fingers like living skin, pulling deeper, twisting into cracks in my knuckles. I scrub until skin peels and bleeds, but by dawn the film returns thicker, darker, crawling deeper like roots feeding on wet fear. The floorboards sweat death. Cold slime oozes between my toes, suffocating, sticky, invading like cloth pulled from stagnant water. It clings with silent insistence, wrapping each step until motion slows. I scrub with shaking hands until skin tears open, but by morning the slick spreads darker, more invasive, slithering into gaps like fingers searching for warmth beneath bone. The clock thrashes. The second hand stumbles and jerks, scraping glass like bone grinding bone. I slap it until skin bruises and breaks, but it thrashes harder, mocking me. I press my forehead to the frame, begging it to stop, but the ticking locks to my skull, dragging me deeper into dizzy loops that threaten to swallow me whole. The mirror screams. My eyes glare bloodshot, lids crusted with thick clumps like decayed moss strangling flesh. Skin peels in jagged strips, exposing raw tissue beneath like bark soaked in rot. For a breath, another face blooms behind mine, bloated, split-mouthed, eyes rolled white in pleading silence. It stretches soundlessly, fingers groping through glass toward me. I spin, knocking over furniture, heart racing. The hallway yawns empty. I turn back. My reflection steadies, but hollowness pools at its edges like shadows that breathe, curling, waiting. The alerts shred. Isolate explodes like shards of glass, splintering into jagged static that crawls across the screen. Exposure twists into veins that writhe like worms burrowing beneath skin, melting into meaningless noise. Contact lost rides backward, crawling like veins desperate to escape before dissolving into nothing. I slam the phone against the wall until the glass fractures outward like black roots splitting bone, creeping toward me with sharp, searching fingers. The orchard claws through glass. Branches twist inward like skeletal fingers, wet and trembling with patient hunger. Bark gleams slick as sweat. They press against the window's edge, arching like claws poised to tear through. Blink, and they vanish. Blink again, and they're closer, crawling faster, more desperate, reaching for me with impossible intent. The walls pulse veins. Dark streaks erupt from corners, curling inward like roots feeding on plaster. Moisture gleams fresh beneath paint, thick and deliberate, pulsing in rhythm with my heartbeat. I claw at them until skin flakes open, but by dawn they've spread farther, wrapping edges like claws eager to rip deeper. The silence hums. A wet rhythm syncs with my pulse before dragging it out of time. It combs through sound like claws brushing bone, wrapping breath and thought in invisible hands. I press my ear against the wall until dizziness floods sight, edges warping like liquid folding over itself. The chills slash. Ice shoots through me from spine to fingertips like knives driven deep. My muscles convulse, fingers limp and useless, skin numb and cold as stone. I claw at air, desperate, but the chill tightens, sinking deeper into skin until it crawls like liquid ice beneath flesh. The ringing carves bone. High, thin, sharp, a blade slicing through skull. It hums at the edge of hearing, stretching until sound shatters, dissolving into pulsing pressure that throbs behind my eyes. I claw at my ears until nails rip skin, but it tightens, swallowing thought and breath alike. The neighbor crawls closer. His limbs twist wrong, joints snapping like branches torn in storms. His skin peels in ragged strips, mottled raw and wet. His eyes roll white in pleading silence as he crawls through thick fog, hands trembling like twigs ripped by wind. I wake biting into my wrist until skin splits, blood hot and sticky against my lips. The rituals fracture. Stay inside. I whisper until breathless fragments splinter like dry twigs. Sometimes I forget mid-sentence. Sometimes the words vanish, replaced by silence pressing against me like living skin, waiting. I trace spirals along my arm with shaking fingers, digging until raw blood beads dark and sticky. I press harder, desperate to erase the pain, but it sharpens, feeding off pressure like a parasite ravenous for flesh. The orchard waits. Its limbs stretch through reflections, wet and gleaming like fingers eager to tear through glass. I stare until my eyes burn raw, but it waits. Patient, silent, always watching, always listening. I don't know where my hand ends. The skin is split open, pale and stretched tight like paper pulled over bone. Dark spirals burst from the cracks, crawling toward my elbow, thick as worms swollen with blood. I claw at them until nails rip loose and hang, but they pulse harder, alive, feeding on the heat of my own panic. I press ointment into the wounds, and it screams through muscle like molten metal poured over nerves. The burning crawls deeper, eating every sinew until even pain feels numb. I scratch again, fingers digging until blood wells dark and slow, but the spirals drink it in silence, slick and sticky like they were born from me. The air claws at my throat. It doesn't brush, it bites. Wet strands coil into my sleeves, slide down my spine, wrap around my neck with claws sharp enough to cut skin. Each breath scrapes deeper, grinding against bone like sandpaper dragged through a raw wound. The stench thickens until it suffocates me whole. Rot, damp moss, rust, sweet, sour, metallic, all slide into my mouth like sludge, coating teeth and tongue until every inhale tastes of decay. I cough until bile floods my throat, but it clings like a second skin, crawling into every fold of flesh, wrapping warmth, stealing breath. I claw at my chest until blood runs, but the air only tightens, dragging deeper with every heartbeat. The refrigerator breathes like a beast. Its low hum thickens into a wet growl that drags across bone like claws combing muscle. It syncs with my pulse before pulling it out of rhythm, dragging breath from my lungs in waves sharp enough to tear thought apart. I press my ear to the cold metal, and it rasp cracks like fingernails scrabbling against bone. My sight swims. Walls ripple inward like water folding over itself. I stumble, breath shallow, heart hammering until I collapse against the door as if it's drawing me inside. The faucet weeps blood. Dark drops swell at the spout's edge, heavy as clotted veins, reluctant before spilling free. They cling, crawling over porcelain lips like skin desperate for warmth. I touch them. Cold slime grips my fingers, pulling into cracks with wet insistence. I scrape until skin tears and blood floods over nails, but by morning the film crawls thicker, darker, curling deeper like worms feeding on damp fear. The floor oozes death. Cold slick creeps up between my toes, suffocating and invasive like cloth dragged from stagnant water. It clings, patient, wrapping each step until motion falters. I scrub until skin flakes open and burns red raw, but by morning the slick spreads darker, thicker, invading seams like fingers hungry for warmth beneath bone. The clock thrashes like a trapped beast. The second hand jerks and freezes, scraping glass like bone grinding against bone. I slap until skin bruises open, but it thrashes harder, mocking my helplessness. I press my forehead to the frame, begging it to stop, but it drags against my skull, pulsing with my headache until dizziness spins me into loops that spin deeper with each breath. The mirror bleeds. My eyes stare swollen, lids cracked with clumps of dried blood like decayed moss strangling flesh. Skin peels in jagged strips, raw and wet like bark torn from a dead tree. For a breath, another face blooms behind mine, bloated, split-mouthed, eyes rolled white in pleading silence. It stretches soundlessly, fingers clawing at the glass, begging for escape. I spin, heart hammering, knocking furniture aside. The hallway yawns empty. I turn back. My reflection steadies, but hollowness pools at its edges like shadows that breathe, curling in wait. The alerts shatter. Isolate bursts into jagged shards of glass that slice across the screen like veins splitting bone. Exposure rides into lines like worms burrowing beneath skin before melting into noise. Contact lost twists backward like desperate veins fleeing sight, dissolving before I can read it. I slam the phone against the wall until the glass spiderwebs outward like dark roots splitting bone, searching for me, reaching toward me. The orchard claws through glass. Branches twist inward like skeletal fingers, slick and trembling with patient hunger. Bark gleams wet as sweat. They press at the window's edge, arching with slow insistence like claws poised to tear through. Blink, and they vanish. Blink again, and they're closer, more desperate, crawling toward me with impossible speed. The walls pulse veins of blood. Dark streaks erupt from corners, curling inward like roots feeding on plaster. Moisture gleams fresh beneath paint, thick and deliberate, pulsing with each heartbeat as if reaching for warmth. I press my palm against them. They throb harder, slick against skin like wet muscle waiting to crawl deeper. I scratch until skin flakes open, but by dawn the veins stretch farther, wrapping edges like claws eager to tear through. The silence hums with teeth. It syncs with my pulse before dragging it out of time, combing through sound like claws brushing bone. I press my ear against the wall until dizziness floods sight, the edges folding inward like liquid swallowing me whole. The chills slash. Ice floods from spine to fingertips like knives driven deep. My muscles convulse, fingers numb and useless, skin turning stone cold as if frozen from within. I claw at air, desperate, but the chill tightens, crawling beneath flesh like liquid ice. The ringing carves bone. A thin blade slices through my skull, humming at the edge of hearing until sound shatters, dissolving into pulsing pressure behind my eyes. I claw at my ears until skin tears open, but the ringing tightens, swallowing thought and breath alike. The neighbor crawls closer. His limbs twist wrong, joints snapping like branches broken in storms. His mottled skin peels in ragged strips, raw and wet. His eyes roll white in pleading silence as he crawls through thick fog, hands trembling like twigs ripped by wind. I wake biting into my wrist until skin bursts open and blood floods my lips. The rituals fracture. Stay inside. I whisper until breathless fragments splinter like dry twigs breaking apart. Sometimes I forget mid-sentence. Sometimes the words vanish altogether, replaced by silence pressing against me like living skin, waiting to consume me whole. I trace spirals along my arm with shaking fingers, digging until raw blood beads dark and sticky. I press harder, desperate to erase the pain, but it sharpens, feeding off pressure like a parasite ravenous for flesh. The orchard waits. Its limbs stretch through reflections, wet and gleaming like fingers eager to tear through glass. I stare until my eyes burn raw, but it waits, patient, silent. Always watching. Always listening. It's inside me. The spirals don't just crawl anymore. They tear through muscle like claws ripping fabric. Dark veins erupt from bone, slick and swollen, sliding across my skin in slow, deliberate hunger. They pulse with a rhythm that's not mine, each throb dragging breath from my lungs. I claw at them until nails shred and skin splits, but they throb harder, swollen with something feeding on my own warmth. I grind my teeth, tasting iron copper rot. I scratch until blood wells dark and sticky, but it only slicks the surface for a moment before thickening again, spreading like roots that know where to go. The air suffocates. It doesn't press, it strangles. Cold, wet strands slide under my clothes, sink into the hollows of muscle, grip my chest with claws sharp enough to tear flesh. Each inhale scrapes against bone like metal shards grinding through cracked stone. The stench drags deeper with every breath, rotting meat, wet moss, iron blood, slick and clinging. It crawls into my lungs, coating them in sticky sludge that drags thought from my head. I cough until bile floods my throat, but the taste stays, pooling at the back of my mouth like acid, invading even memory. The walls pulse. Veins slick with moisture bloom from cracks, twisting like roots feeding on bone. The paint gleams fresh as blood, deliberate, as if the structure itself hungers for warmth. I press my ear against the cold surface. The pulse drags against my skull like claws combing muscle. Silence hums low and wet, thick as swamp air. It folds thought inward, stretching the edges of the room until everything seems to lean toward a void, eager to swallow me. The orchard waits. Branches press against the window with slow insistence, arching like fingers tipped with teeth. Bark glistens wet and gleaming as if breathing. I stare until my eyes burn raw, but it doesn't move faster, only waits, always watching, always closer. The faucet bleeds. Dark drops gather at its edge, heavy and reluctant like veins strangled before birth. They hang trembling, before sliding into the porcelain with soft, wet sighs that echo long after the last drop falls. I touch them. Cold slime coils around my fingers like living skin, dragging into cracks as if hungry. I scrub until raw flesh tears open, but the next morning it's thicker, darker, feeding deeper into the seams like fingers that know how to crawl. The mirror screams. My eyes gape bloodshot, lids crusted with clumps of dried blood like fungus strangling roots. Skin peels in jagged strips, exposing raw muscle like bark peeled from a dying tree. For one breath another face blooms, bloated, split-mouthed, eyes rolled back, pleading soundlessly. It stretches toward me, fingers clawing at the glass. I spin, heart pounding, knocking over chairs, but the hallway yawns empty. I turn back. My reflection steadies, but hollowness coils at its edges, curling like breathless shadows ready to spill through. The clock claws. The second hand jerks, freezes, scrapes glass like bone grinding against bone. I slap it until skin bruises open, but it thrashes harder, mocking. I press my forehead to the frame, begging it to stop, but it drags against my skull like claws sinking deeper with every heartbeat. The refrigerator roars. Its low hum thickens into a wet growl that drags breath from me like claws combing muscle. I press my ear against the frozen door, and it rasps cracks against bone like fingernails clawing sinew. My vision distorts, walls ripple inward like liquid folding around me. I stumble back gasping, nearly collapsing against it as if it breathes me in. The ringing slices. A thin blade hums at the edge of hearing, sharp enough to shear thought apart. The sound lengthens until it fractures into pulsing pressure behind my eyes. I claw at my ears until skin tears open, but the ringing tightens, swallowing breath, thought, and everything but pain. The alerts explode. Isolate bursts into shards of glass, slicing across the screen like veins split by knives. Exposure twists into crawling lines, squirming like worms beneath glass before melting into static. Contact loss spirals backward like veins fleeing sight, dissolving into meaningless noise. I slam the phone against the wall until it splinters outward like black roots cracking bone, reaching for me. The rituals crack. Stay inside. I whisper until breathless fragments splinter like dry twigs snapping apart. Sometimes the words vanish mid-sentence. Sometimes they dissolve altogether, replaced by silence pressing against my skin, waiting. I trace spirals with shaking fingers along my arm until raw blood beads dark and slick. I press harder, desperate to erase the pain, but it sharpens, feeding on pressure like something ravenous. The neighbor crawls closer. His limbs twist wrong, joints snapping like branches torn by storms. His mottled skin peels in strips, raw and wet. His eyes roll white, pleading in silence as he crawls through fog thick with rot, hands trembling like twigs ripped apart by wind. I wake biting into my wrist until flesh bursts open and blood floods my lips like hot syrup. The silence hums with teeth. It syncs with my pulse before dragging it out of time, combing sound into absence like claws brushing bone. I press my ear to the wall until dizziness floods sight, and the edges fold inward like liquid drowning me whole. I don't exist anymore. My veins pulse without rhythm. My lungs choke on rot. My ears hum with blades. My skin peels with worms. Every breath is a trap. Every surface waits. The orchard waits. The refrigerator waits. The mirror waits. The silence waits. Always waiting. I trace spirals again. I whisper until breath shatters. I press until blood wells dark and sticky, feeding them. I am already gone. The orchard waits. Always waiting.